Vatican Holocaust by Avro Manhattan Chapter 5, The Triumph of Terrorism, to complement the wholesale manhandling, torturing, and legalized killing of the Ustashi, another terrible instrument, perhaps the most execrable of all, struck with fears an already terrorized population. The punitive expeditions carried out by Pavlik's own special militia, the Ustashi, who in no time acquired such an infamous notoriety as to equal the most abominable human monsters of the past. These expeditions destroyed houses and villages, arrested, tortured, plundered, and often massacred their inhabitants, usually without even bothering about any excuse or appearance of legality. Whole districts such as Bosanska Krajina, Laika, Kordon, Banija, Gorski Kotar, Srem, and regions of Slavonia were completely laid waste by him. Numerous small towns such as Vojnik, Slun, Koronaika, and Virgin Most were entirely destroyed, while wholesale massacres took place at a number of places such as Rakot, Potot, Maxima near Zagreb, the Vojnovic Plateau at Belova, the Osijek Town Park, and Jadovno in Laika. At the last named place, victims were wired together in groups of 20, taken to the edge of a 1,000 feet cliff, where the Ustashi killed the first persons only, so that they dragged the others down alive with them. Pavlik participated personally, even against Croat villages, on December the 1st, 1941, when Sergei Pasnik and Jesenji were raised, on which occasion 7 women, 4 children, and 9 old men were killed and thrown into a burning house, or in 1945, when the village of Jakovje was razed, after most of its inhabitants had been murdered. In April 1941, in the village of Gadovac, 200 Serb peasants were killed by the Ustashi, followed by larger groups in the villages of Stari Petrovac in the district of Novogradaiska and in Glina. There, in the early days of May 1941, Ustashi from Karlovac, Sisak, and Petrin gathered together. All males over 15 years of age, drove them in trucks outside of town and executed them all. Often the executions were committed in the homes of the victims with the most primitive weapons. Some Ustashi specialized in disposing of their charges by crushing their skulls with hatchets or even with hammers. Incredible and authenticated atrocities were committed wherever the Ustashi appeared. At Dubrovnik, Dalmatia, for instance, Italian soldiers took pictures of an Ustashi wearing 2 necklaces. One was a string of cut-out eyes, the other of torn-out tongues of murdered Serbs. Mass deportations and mass executions, mainly in isolated small towns and villages, were well-planned operations. As a rule, the procedure was a simple one. Ustashi authorities summoned groups of Serbs under the pretext of recruitment for military service or public works. Once rounded up, they were surrounded by detachments of armed Ustashi taken outside the village and executed. In the mountainous regions of Upper Dalmatia, like Bosnia and Herzegovina, women and children were taken to remote spots and massacred. In Brsko, the home of Dafer Kulenovic, Ustashi deputy prime minister, the prisoners were executed on bridges and then thrown in the river. At the beginning of May 1941, the Ustashi besieged Glina and, having gathered all Orthodox males over 15 years of age from Karlovac, Sisak, and Petrin, drove them outside of town and killed all 600 of them with guns, knives, and sledgehammers. The following day, all the other Serbs were also murdered. The center of the massacre was in the village of Bosanski Grabovac. On August the 3rd, 1941, over 3,000 Serbs were likewise massacred in Virgin Most. On July 29, 1941, Bozidar Saravsky, chief of the Ustashi police in Zagreb, arrived in the locality of Vojnik, having rounded up more than 3,000 Serbs from Krnjak, Krstein, Siroka, Rika, Slun, Rakovic, and other villages. He led them to Pakovic, where he had them all massacred near a village mill in the villages of Baska, Perna, and Podgomol, Bosanska Krapa district. In the summer of 1941, 540 women and children were locked in houses, which were then set on fire. In the village of Srivarovac, about 600 people were burned in their houses. In the district of Sazin at Smilenik, more than 60 women and children were burned to death. 500 people were massacred at Bugoyno. At Slavonska Poziga, 500 peasants brought from Bosnia were killed. In some districts of Stim, in the summer of 1942, over 6,000 Serbs were killed. At Bihak, within one single day in June 1941, 2,000 Serbs were killed, while during July and August of the same year, over 12,000 more were massacred in the Bosanska Krapa district. In the summer of 1941, a total of 15,000 people were killed. Such mass murders were carried out in the most systematic fashion, and they were often planned directly from Zagreb. At times, they were semi-legalized by statutory orders. For instance, on October 2nd, 1941, Pavlik issued a statutory order that in any case of an attack against the Ustashi as a reprisal, without any court procedure, 10 persons to be chosen by the police were to be shot. On October 30th, 1943, in another statutory order, he ordered reprisals by shooting, hanging, or sending to concentration camps hostages to be chosen by the police, together with their parents, children, and spouses. On June 30th, 1944, he appointed a special deputy for pronouncing such measures of reprisal. Under these orders, a large number of citizens were shot, hanged, or taken to concentration camps without any trial. At Rama, on August 14, 1942, for instance, 90 hostages were shot. At Sremska Mitrovica, on August 19, 1942, another 90. And at Vakova, on August 24, 1942, 140 hostages. Ustashi cutting the throat of one of their Serbian Orthodox victims. Notice how a Ustashi is holding a vessel to collect the first spurt of blood and thus prevent their uniforms being blood-stained. The brutal crime, one of many, took place near Kajets in 1943. This type of execution was not exceptional. Some Ustashi specialized in dispatching their Orthodox prisoners in this manner. Catholic priests, friars, and indeed even some of their pupils followed their example. The case of Peter Bazaika is undoubtedly one of the most incredible in this category. Bazaika was a law student and not a member in the foremost Catholic organization called the Catholic Crusaders. During the day and night of 29 August 1942, Bazaika cut the throats of 1,300 prisoners in the concentration camp Jasenovac. He was rewarded with a gold watch and proclaimed King of Cutthroats. Dr. Nikola Kailolik, a Croat and a Catholic, was an eyewitness to the deed. Duro Vranjes, an Orthodox Serb, was born at Selo Cetina, Dalmatia. His uncle Elijah A. Vranjes, one day in July 1941, was arrested by a detachment of Ustashi who, without even bothering to give any legal excuse, tortured him to death, hacking him to pieces while still alive. This they did with such horrifying fiendishness that once he was finally dead, his nephew, Duro Vranjes, seen above, had to use a blanket in which to collect the chopped members of the body. On the 30th January 1942, the Ustashi descended on the village of Bosanska Ribnica, where Stanko Djokic, above right, lived with his family. While he was up in the woods, the Ustashi dragged his wife and her 5 children to the banks of the nearby little river of Rebecca, and even without asking them if they wanted to become Catholics, massacred the lot. 6 months later, when Stanko Djokic came back, he found 6 corpses of his family still lying there, where they had been killed. He buried them with his own hands. The worst atrocities, strange as it may seem, were carried out by members of the intelligence. The case of Peter Bazajka is undoubtedly one of the most incredible in this category. Peter Bazajka had attended a Franciscan college at Siroki Breg, Herzegovina, was a law student and a member of the Catholic Organization of the Crusaders. In the concentration camp at Jasenovac, on the night of August 29, 1942, orders were issued for executions. Bets were made as to who could liquidate the largest number of inmates. Bazajka cut the throats of 1,360 prisoners with a specially sharpened butcher's knife. Having been proclaimed the prize winner of the competition, he was elected king of the cutthroats. A gold watch, a silver service, and a roasted sucking pig and wine were his other rewards. A doctor, Dr. Nikola Kailolik himself, a Croat, was an eyewitness in the camp when the event took place and subsequently testified to the authenticity of the astonishing deed. Mass murders were supplemented by the massacre of individuals of small numbers as part of the well-calculated policy of the government, which had them carried out uninterruptedly in rural districts with a view to terrorizing the populations. Cases of the utmost ferocity, which occurred all over Croatia, would be unbelievable were they not authenticated. In September 1942, the Ustashi carried out a raid on the village of Dakovsko and killed anyone on sight. Among other deeds, they threw 8 men into a pit. One of these saved himself by getting hold of a protruding rock. The Ustashi, noticing this, amused themselves by hurling heavy stones at him until he dropped to the bottom and died. Others, mostly people that were related or members of the same family, were tied together and similarly thrown into a pit. In July 1941, a youth of 16, Slavko Popovic, was taken by the Ustashi to a field, ordered to dig a grave, killed while doing so, and buried in it. On September 20, 1942, a group of escaping people were caught by the Ustashi. All of them, 54 men and women, were massacred. Their bodies heaped up and set on fire. In June 1943, the Ustashi, passing through the village of Zaimat, rounded up those who had not time to escape, 74 old men, women, and children, and put them into a shed, which they set on fire. All were burned alive. Among them were the aunt and the 2 children of Vojislav Zajvanik, who lost 25 members of his large family, including his father and brother, massacred by the Ustashi during these raids. These were not isolated instances. The Ustashi more often than not massacred all the inhabitants of the Serb villages, callously torturing and killing even children, and then setting the villages on fire. In the village of Sasnarai, for instance, the Ustashi, after having killed most of the inhabitants, led away about 20 surviving children whom they tied to the threshold of a big barn, which was then set on fire. Most of the children of an average age of about 10 were burned alive. The few who survived, horribly scorched, were eventually killed. Eyewitnesses testified to similar occurrences. In the village of Gorivac, on September 13, 1941, children of about 3 years of age were impaled. In some places, mothers threw themselves down with children in their arms, and one stake perforated mother and child. Some young girls had their breasts tied or cut. Others had their hands made to pass through them. Men had their ears and noses sawn away, and eyes had been uprooted from their sockets. Orthodox worshippers, when not dispatched to concentration camps, suffered the same fate as their clergy. Congregations, unless willing to change their religion, were not only persecuted, hunted down, and arrested, but at times, besides being massacred by the Ustashi bayonets or machine guns, they were killed within their own churches. There were instances even when they were burned alive within them. To terrorize the population into becoming Catholic, the Ustashi often hanged lay Orthodox leaders and their Orthodox parish priests, doing mass executions under the very eyes of the faithful. This was one of the most tangible methods of persuasion whenever the Orthodox proved obdurate. Those who escaped with their lives were sent to concentration camps, while about 700 that age, 1/4 of the total number of Orthodox priests, were murdered by the Ustashi in this manner. Above, Orthodox priests and Serbs hanged together for defying the policy of the Ustashi of the Catholic clergy. The ordinary Orthodox clergy became the target of Ustashi Catholic ferocity. Priests were imprisoned, hunted down, or simply massacred. Orthodox priests, before being executed or hanged, very often were horribly tortured. Father Branko Dobrosaljevic from Velin, who had to read the obituary of his own son, whom the Ustashi killed in his presence after horribly mutilating him. On April the 20th, 1941, in the village of Svenais, the Ustashi arrested the Orthodox priest, Father Babik, and after knifing him all over, buried him still alive in an upright position. Within a few weeks, the Ustashi, encouraged by Catholic padres, murdered 135 Orthodox priests, of whom 85 came from one single Orthodox diocese. Hundreds of Orthodox clergy perished thus, only because they were priests of a religion which refused to join the quote-unquote true church. In this photograph, 2 Orthodox priests hanged in public without trial by the Catholic Ustashi on April 28, 1941. Ustashi encircled the villages of Jarovac, Brezovac, Klokosivac, and Bolak in the district of Belova, arresting 250 Orthodox peasants, among whom was Stephen Ivankovich and the Orthodox priest Bozin. Having led them all to a field, the Ustashi ordered them to dig their own graves, after which their hands were tied behind their backs and they were pushed alive into their graves. This feat created a commotion even among the Nazis, who set up a committee charged with the specific task of exhuming the bodies and taking photographs as evidence. The oral process was incorporated in an official document of Nazi Germany under the title of Ustashi Work by Belova, in a memorandum drafted by an officer sent to protect the Orthodox population of Eastern Bosnia during the terrible massacre of August 1941. There was, among other things, the following. During our journey towards the hill of Javor, near Srebrenica and Ozan, all the Serbian villages which we came across were wholly deserted, but inside the houses very often we find whole families massacred. We even came across some barrels filled with blood. In the villages between Vlasenica and Kladan, we discovered children that had been impaled upon stakes, their small members still distorted by pain, resembling insects stuck upon pins. In the town of Sisak, the Ustashi arrested an Orthodox Serb industrialist, Milos Teslit, well known for his kindness, and burned him alive. One of those most responsible for this crime was Catholic Ustashi Fegat. To crown all these horrors, some Ustashi did not hesitate to crucify their victims, to mention only 2, Luke Abramovich, former member of parliament, and his son, who were both crucified and then burned in their own home in Blanist, in the district of Gleimark. Such atrocities occurred with a frequency that shocked even the Ustashi ideological allies, the Italian fascists and the German Nazis. This to such an extent that on more than one occasion both the Italian and German authorities not only deprived the Ustashi of the command of whole regions, but actually ousted them altogether, replacing them with Italian and German troops to prevent a repetition of the terrible individual mass murders committed by Pavlik's Catholic units. It will suffice for us to mention 2 typical cases which led to such a replacement. On August 2nd, 1941, the Ustashi authorities of Virgin Most and of Srebrenica announced that all Serbs who did not wish to be molested had better assemble on the following day At 3 a.m. in Virgin Most, where Catholic priests would be waiting to convert them to Catholicism. About 5,000 people followed this advice. Instead of Catholic priests, units of Ustashi armed with machine guns encircled the assembled crowd who were held prisoners until the following day when they were all massacred. Among them were 37 children under 10 years of age. Not long afterwards, on August the 20th, 1941, another unit of the Ustashi arrested all Serbs in the neighboring region of Livno, took them to the woods of Koprivnica between Bugojno and Kupres, and killed them all. A few days later, they arrested all the surviving families, whom they also massacred on the same spot. Before the massacre, women and even young girls were raped, after which most of them had their breasts cut and arms and legs broken. Some old men before being executed were blinded by way of having their eyes cut with knives or torn from their sockets. Mass executions with the Ustashi took sundry forms. Often they assembled the members of the village outside and then shot the lot. Or they shut a whole congregation inside their church and then set fire to it. When in a hurry, however, they became experts at individual and mass hangings. Their expertise was a regular feature on their barefaced terrorization. This was particularly so during the last years of their regime. Here are a few examples. On August the 7th, 1944, they hanged 10 persons. On August the 26th at Jablanak, near Zaprasik, 36 people. On September the 30th, between the stations of Puska, Bystra, and Luke, 10 persons. On October the 4th at St. Ivan, 29 persons. On October the 5th, again at Zaprasik, 5 persons. On October the 6th, 20 persons. On October the 9th, at Velika Goraika, 13 persons. On the same, near Samobor, 18 persons. On December the 28th at Kroslevo, 500 women and children were hurled into pits in the hills of Tasnaika and Komosnaika, while another 80 women and children were massacred in the village school of Salabik. The Italian fascist authorities were so shocked by such incredible cruelty that in addition to dispatching their troops to protect the surviving population and occupying the region of Livno and neighboring places, they dispersed the Ustashi and sent a protest to Zagreb. Ustashi were committing no less abominable atrocities in other parts of the country. In the town of Prido, for instance, during the night of July 31st/August 1st in 1941, they massacred 1,400 men, women, and children, leaving their corpses to rot in the houses and in the streets. The Nazis nearby, horrified at such wholesale butchery, entered the town, compelling the Ustashi to leave. The Nazis had records of massacres of their own second to none, yet the horrors committed by Pavlik's Ustashi troops proved to be of such bestiality as to shock even them. A most crushing evidence that the Ustashi massacres had surpassed anything experienced even by the Germany of Hitler. The magnitude of the butchery can best be gauged by the fact that within the first 3 months, from April to June 1941, 120,000 people perished. Thus, proportionately to its duration and the smallness of the territory, it had been the greatest massacre to take place anywhere in the West prior to, during, or after that greatest of cataclysms, the Second World War.